hub,
and spoke. Audio Collective.
Control is new from Commercial Type. Originally drawn for interview by Christian Schwartz and Miguel Reyes, this sans serif is designed for flexibility and can bring tasteful modernism or 70s tight-knot touching exuberance to any layout. See Control and download a free trial version at commercialtype.com. Good morning. My name is Mike. I'm the editor of Mountain Gazette, and Mountain Gazette 202 is out the door. Subscribers are getting it, and since I'm just going to wrongfully assume that everyone listening to this lives in New York, let's go Mets. That's right. They had a great win. This might come back and bite me for rooting for a team in the playoffs that has historically lost all the time, but you know what's not losing? Print magazines. Enjoy the show and subscribe at mountaingazette.com.
While many printers have shifted their focus, Freeport Press has remained committed to the art of print. For companies that need a printing partner for magazines, look no further than Freeport Press. We offer the capabilities a customer would expect from a national printer while offering the level of customer service clients expect from a family-owned business. Freeport Press. We do print, and we do it well.
freeportpress.com.
And I felt so privileged to be in this place where down the hall was this group of incredible designers. How could you not be inspired? And up the street was David Armario, and before him, Mark Danzig. And I have to admit, we were all feeding off what was going on down at Rolling Stone. But what I think was good was that the guy who owned the magazine allowed it. For whatever reason, he allowed that to happen, for all that fantastic work to come out.
This is Print is Dead, Long Live Print, a podcast about magazines and the people who made and make them. I'm Deborah Bishop.
I'm Patrick Mitchell. Just about every magazine Richard Baker worked for has died, even one called Life. Also dead, the Washington Post magazine, Vibe, Premiere, and Parade. Another, Saveur, also died, but has recently been resurrected, and Us magazine, a mere shadow of its former self. Sadly, Baker's career narrative is not that uncommon. That's why you're listening to a podcast called Print is Dead. But Richard Baker is a survivor. He survived immigrating from Jamaica as a kid. He survived the sudden loss of 3 influential and beloved mentors. And he survived a near-fatal medical emergency in the New York subway. Yet in the face of all that carnage, Richard Baker just keeps going. To this day, he's living the magazine dream, Classic Edition, as a designer at a sturdy newsstand publication, Ink Magazine, in a brick-and-mortar office, 7 World Trade Center, working with real people and making something beautiful with ink and paper. This is a story about resilience. I would like to start. There's a lot of interesting things about your life and career. But I want to start with the fact that I believe you were the last art director of the venerable, legendary Life magazine. Is that true?
Yes, I was. Yes, I am. I was.
I know that it remains, in some weird iterations of collections or special history things, but I would love to just hear you talk about how you got to Life magazine and what Life magazine was at the time. I think you were the last person to be the art director of Life in any sense of a real version of Life magazine, and a really interesting version.
How did I get there? I got there when I was probably 7 years old. I just remember Life magazine back then, and I didn't know what it meant. I didn't understand it. And you'd come across it, especially in school, in college. You come across it, you see old issues, so it's stuck in your mind. And to an odd way, Karen Goldberg had a little touch in there to get me in there. I got a call from Bill Shapiro, and I was at Premiere. And it was one of those things where I'm just going to stay at Premiere for a while. I've always wanted a place where I could just stay for a while, because even to this day, I'm still averaging 3 to 4 years at a magazine, and I really wanted a place. So I was at Premiere, and I got this call from Bill on the answer machine, and I didn't respond. I had heard through the grapevine, like, this guy, Bill, was looking for somebody. He didn't say for what, and I was just like, forget it. And then Anka, who was working with Karen at the time.
Anka is your wife?
Yeah. She said, Karen said to call Bill. She said that it's important to call Bill. I said, well, why? And he said, he's looking for somebody at Life. And I said, what the fuck? And I was just like, oh, I can't believe I dropped this, And I called him. It was on a Friday. And he picks up the phone and he goes, yeah, you never called me back. Nice. And he's like, Karen talks about you, but you never called me back. And I said, okay, listen, I know that was a big screw up. Give me a shot. And he goes, okay, here's the deal. Monday is when I'm making the decision. If you want to show me some stuff, sure. And I had this thing for a while where I was never going to do tests for anybody. I had done one before and it went so bad. I was just like, screw it. But my feeling was, live calls, what are you going to do? Right? So that Monday, I got my computer, put some stuff up. It was more about ideas than design. Some of the ideas I stole, like from Esquire. Remember that thing about Muhammad Ali's fist, actual size? So I sent it in Sunday. Monday went by, Tuesday went by, didn't hear anything. Well, I guess I really screwed the pooch on that one. And then so later in the week, he calls me and he goes, I really like this stuff. And he goes, why don't we talk? And he meets me at this Greek place. And he said, look, I really like this stuff, but you never called me back. So I don't even know why I'm talking to you. And I said, you're talking to me because I want this thing. And so he looked through it. We talked a little bit. He said, let me think about this. I really like this stuff. And then like a day later, he's like, okay, Richard, no pun intended, but you're the dark horse.
Oh, God.
Thanks, Bill Shapiro. Yeah. And so we talked about it. And back then, when they used to say, like, in terms of budgets, you have a 5-year plan. And I said, how long is the plan? And he said, 5 years. And I looked at him and said, okay, so we have 3. Because that came around 2004 or 5 when the bottom fell out. Really, things were starting to change. And he was like, yeah, I'd give it 3 years. And I really liked it. I really enjoyed working with him. I thank Karen because I thought that was so awesome of her to do.
People don't know that. So Life has come and gone many times. We've documented it in the podcast. This time around, it had been gone for a while.
Yeah.
And we're coming back as a Sunday newspaper magazine to be inserted in the newspapers across the country.
36 million papers was the idea. 36. And in a way, that was my second time at bat for Life because I applied for a job at Life just for the hell of it, like the week before it folded. I actually went to, what was her name? The wonderful woman who was the head of HR. Really short and feisty and just wonderful. Bucky Keaty.
Oh, Bucky.
Yeah. So I went to Bucky and I said, I really want to work for Life. And she said, I'm trying to get you in here. Let's see what we can do. And so she introduced me to Martha Nelson, who was the Uber creative director at the time.
She the editorial director, right?
Yes. And so I'm there talking to her, blah, 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 blah. And then she's talking to me about the fashion magazine, In Style. And then all of a sudden we both look at each other and I said, oh, no, I'm not here for In Style. I want to do Life. She goes, Bucky sent you up here for In Style. I'm like, no, I want to do Life. And I think to myself, I am telling this big time woman that I don't want any part of her magazine. What the frick is wrong with you? And so she introduced me to this gentleman whose name I can't remember. I went to his office and I made my spiel and he looked at me and he said, sounds good, but you know what? We're shutting down in a week. You're probably the first outsider to know this. And he goes, but you know what? Back in about 10 years, make the same pitch. I'm sure somebody will start it up again.
What was the plan? It was going to be a weekly newspaper magazine. Was the approach continue on the same sort of Life magazine it had always been?
I think they were trying to, a couple of things. Aside from the economy, but remember, it's maybe 4 or 5 years after 9/11, so that was going on. People were very careful about what they would put into the magazine. You know the magazine business, nobody has any answer, but everybody guess what people want to see. And Bill Shapiro, I wasn't quite sure what he wanted, but when he hired George Pitts, I knew that somehow Bill had this idea that it was going to be, yes, we're going to give the nice stuff. And I think the idea was to somehow straddle it. So you didn't go take it too far around the curve so that middle America could get it and understand it. And at the same time, try not to be too New York. Because remember, as Maggie Murphy would say, Manhattan is an island off the coast of America. So you got to be careful about what you put in the magazine. And I think the idea in his mind was, yes, we're bringing it back, but we have to plant it in a place of reality. It can't be all sugar and candy. At the same time, it wasn't quite there yet, but the internet had a lot to play in it.
Did you go back and look at the history of Life magazine in terms of inspiring the design?
You know what? I went back and I looked at it, and the thing that occurred to me was it wasn't a great design magazine. It was a great magazine of ideas with great photography. The design was almost like an accommodation. It was a bit player. It was important, but it support the bigger thing. And when I was doing the cover, it was weird because at one point I was doing the cover and somebody would come up and he goes, "You could make the logo green." I'm like, "What? Do you know what this is?" "No, man, you can't do that." And so I did a little design, and the only person that caught on was Karen. On the magazine, if you look at the bottom of the magazine, it had this red bar that went across. And I think either it was the price of the date, it had a little square that went like that. The only thing I did was made the square round, and that was it, because I think that's all it needed. It's like you have this quintessential magazine. I'm just grateful to be doing it. I'm not there to rip it apart. And frankly, whatever the new thing was going to be, the design was going to come out of that.
Its whole value is in what it has always looked like. That's the reason people keep bringing it back, because it's Life magazine.
And yet the value, in a way, hurt it. There was this wonderful editor, Bob Sullivan, who had this great knowledge of magazines, and he had been at Time Inc. for a long time, and just smart. And there was another ad guy who I can't remember, but they had their doubts, and in a real place. And these guys were like, "You think this 24-year-old kid is going to know what this thing means? Don't think so." And to a certain extent, they didn't understand what this thing was. It's old media. They weren't buying into it. These guys were happy to do it, but they saw something. They were very clear-eyed about it. It could go well or it could go south. I don't think they had any illusions.
You grew up in Kingston, Jamaica, and you've said that your family was just north of poor and just south of middle class. Talk about your early days.
Oh, man, I was going to actually bring a photograph of me when I was like 2 years old. I forgot. But I had a pretty decent childhood. It died in teenage years, but I mostly grew up with my grandma, who doted on me because I was the first boy. And she liked Westerns, and that's why I like Westerns. And she liked movies, and that's why I like movies. And I spend the summers down there climbing trees and making kites and whatever. And then my parents eventually moved to a place called Caribbean Terrace, which was by the sea, which is my favorite place into this day ever. We grew up on the beach. We were like 25 yards from the water. We were always down at the water. We spent the summers down there. We lived near these hills. And I had a really good group of friends. And we all had pet names. So what did you call them? Pet names, right?
Nicknames, yeah.
Nicknames? What was your nickname, Richard?
I had a couple. Nobody called me Richard or Ricky. I actually ended up taking Richard when I moved to America. But my name, it's Richard Michael. People call me Mickey. I had a friend who called me Baker Buggy. I don't know why Baker Buggy. But my best friend was a kid named Skinny. And to this day, we're still in contact. And I still call him Skinny. He's not Skinny anymore, but I still call him Skinny.
Shout out to Skinny.
Hey, the reason we call him Skinny was his name is Andre. And there were two kids named Andre. He was Andre Goodley, and the other kid was named Andre Kong. And Andre Kong was a big, tall, fat guy. And I know, this is back in the days. So there's no sensitivity among kids here. So we'd call Big Andre Fatty, and we'd call Skinny Andre Skinny. And then we had the song that said, "Fatty and Skinny went to bed. Fatty rolled over and Skinny was dead." I don't know who came up with that. But the thing is, those guys didn't mind. It was their names.
So what did your parents do?
My dad was in advertising, but he came up through the ranks. When he left high school, he went to work for a plate maker that made print plates for newspapers. And then, he learned how to do that as a craft, and then learned how to do advertising, make advertising plates, and sort of came up the ranks through a company. And then he became like an art director or a design director. And of course, I was just like, I don't want to do that. Who the hell wants to be an art director? And his claim to fame was he and a group worked on this ad campaign that when we were kids, we were like, "Oh, Daddy did that." It was called "The Best Dressed Chicken in Town." And it was a chicken with a monocle.
I love it. And your mom, what did your mom?
My mom, she worked with him for a little bit at the same company. And then we did the immigrant thing. My mom left and went to America. And the idea was, the immigrant thing, it's the mother goes, she gets a job, and eventually she makes enough money, sends it back. And eventually kids come up one by one or a couple at a time. And my older sister and my younger sister, they went up first. And in between that, my parents got divorced because my dad, the idea was that he was supposed to come. And he decided he didn't want to go to America because he felt like it was just not the place for him. And she had made a life. And I stayed back because I wanted to be with my dad for a while. So I stayed for high school.
At a certain point,
Yeah.
you came to the conclusion that if you were to stay in Jamaica, your options were rather limited. What were the options?
My options at the time was getting a job with the help of my aunt at the Royal Jamaican Post Office. Had this cool little red vans, or selling weed, which was pretty easy. Yeah. Which is accessible, and I knew enough people who sold weed, and sure. But I was never a great student. I went to school for engineering, and I could do stuff with my hands. I was great at drafting and great at making stuff. I was good at algebra, and everything else was terrible. Physics sucked. And so I knew I wasn't going to go to university, because the University of West Indies is top notch. And at about that time, I saw what my life could be and decide if I want to do something, it's not going to be here in Jamaica.
So you told us earlier that you had gotten your high school engineer's apprentice certificate.
Yeah.
How do you go from that to enrolling at the School of Visual Arts in just a couple short years? That's a big turnaround.
The thing is that engineering certificate meant nothing in America.
Did it have meaning to you in terms of your interest?
I thought I could get a job as an engineer, at least as an engineer's apprentice. They weren't hiring an engineer apprentice. And the level of work that I know, I would need to know much more. Basically, what I had essentially was a certificate for trade school. And eventually I made my way up to New York. And I think I'd mentioned I had an accident, as a messenger. I had an accident, got hit off my bike. And then a friend of mine said, look, your face is pretty screwed up, because I had a fall on my jaw and stuff. And he said, if you go to NYU, they'll do it for you for free, because I didn't have any money. So I'm walking down there, and I'm on 23rd Street, and I see this building with people just hanging out, and I'm checking it out. At first, I thought I saw the sign, I thought it was a school for the deaf. Then I saw these guys who looked like they just came out of the methadone program. So I thought, okay. But then I looked in, and there was this art on the wall, and it was just trying to find something to place my feet in, just give me some interest, something. I wasn't ready to sign up for school, like university. I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. I went in, and there was this guard there, and he told me what it was, and it was art school, and all you need is a portfolio. I didn't know what a portfolio was. And he said, listen, just put some stuff together, put some art together, some drawings and stuff, put them in a thing, and then just print them in and maybe get an interview. You should call them first. That's when there was no cell, so I had to call them. And I remember getting an appointment. And at the time, I was taking courses at the School of Art and Design on 5th Avenue up by the Guggenheim. And I was taking printmaking classes. So the prints I had there, I brought with me and showed them. And next thing you know, I was enrolled. And then I had to figure out school loans. And I was just like, wow, school loans, God, I'm going to be broke for the rest of my life. And I went and looked back, and I think it was somewhere between $1,200 and $1,500. And I thought I was going to be broke forever, which made me get another job at Gimbel's department store. So I was so afraid I was going to be broke. So that's how I ended up at the School of Visual Arts. And I had no idea, honestly, what design was. I actually went to be a painter. But after my first semester of painting, I realized that was not going to be where it was going to be for me. I was just not good at it and found it boring. And then I met people who were really good, like people who believed they were going to be painters. And I didn't have that thing that they had at all.
You studied with Paula Scher, as did I.
Yes.
The 80s was such a special time for graphic design in New York. And we were taught by some of the best. And Paula, obviously, and Karen Goldberg.
Oh, absolutely.
Tell us about that.
Okay. So to get to Paula, I took these classes with a guy named Skip Servino. And he had this thing where the girls loved him. And I was just like, okay, all right. And he had us do this project, and I didn't know about design, so I'm like, I'm doing the project, like I'm doing the work. And I remember he had us design lotto cards, And I remember making a stat, an emulsion, and you could see through it. And then I had to paint the back of the cards. It's like all this machination, right? And I remember taking my time and painting it and putting it in between the cardboard and cutting them out and framing it and putting it in my like make-believe portfolio. Eventually, Richard Wiles said to me, you should go take Paula Scher's class. I said, go to Paula Scher's class. And I remember she's looking through the work of different people just to see what you have. She opens my little thing and she's like, all right, you got to get rid of this. I'm like, that take me forever to make. And she goes, what? You want to make Lotto for the rest of your life? And she just threw it out. I was like, oh my God, my best work. I had the best time.
If you know Paula Scher, that will surprise no one.
This is tough cookie. But what I loved was, I remember when she used to smoke and she would just look at your work and it was like this. She had this long ash over there. And I remember Cindy Becker. It's like, looking at this, I'm looking at Cindy's work, and Cindy's maneuvering just in case the ash fell, she could catch it. Like,
I remember all of this.
Paula just is the one who decides when the ash falls.
Yeah.
Richard, this story was going to come out sooner or later.
Oh my God. Yeah. And the thing about it, why I said it ended up me going to her was I was still trying to figure out what this thing was, design. What was this thing? Because I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, but I thought I had a kind of a knack for it. And I remember we did this thing, this series of, I don't know, images or whatever. And we had them put on the wall in the foyer of the building. And Skip Savannah came over and looked at it and he went, oh, you're doing that Russian constructivist shit.
I had that criticism as well.
And I thought, I'm going to stick it out with this woman here. Because essentially, I liked what we were doing. The work that I was doing in Skip's classroom was fine, but I felt like if I could look at it in a cold eye now, you might say there was nothing wrong with it. It was very commercial in that way at the time. You might be able to take it to an ad agency as a designer and get a job doing layouts with markers or something like that.
We'll be right back.
Hi, this is Jeremy Leslie at Mag Culture. We're proud to support the Print is Dead podcast because we love magazines too. Visit magculture.com and see why print is far from over. It's just getting started. Read the journal for interviews and reviews, listen to our podcasts, visit our shop in London and online, and come to our live events in London and New York. We love magazines. Subscribe to our newsletter for weekly updates, all at magculture.com.
Your first job was at Coppell and Scher as an intern. Did Paula introduce you to Terry?
No, I took a class with Terry, and somehow he asked me if I wanted an internship.
Can you just quickly tell people who Terry was to the design world?
Yeah, Terry Coppell at the time, he was a teacher at School of Visual Art, but Terry Coppell was, God, how do you describe Terry? Other than the most irreverent designer that I knew. Here's what I know about Terry. It was brilliant, right? Really good, brilliant. But all the Jewish words I knew, I learned from Terry. And I remember when I went home one year and I was using Goyim and Shiksa. And my mom was just like, what are you talking about? And I was like, us Meshuggah, forget it. Yeah. Yeah. And I learned all those words from Terry. Yeah.
Were he and Paula, was their studio going at that time?
Yeah. They had two studios. The second one I wasn't there for, but I remember going by there. It was this beautifully fancy studio. The first one was basically a loft, and it was on 26th Street between 6 and 7. And I remember we would come downstairs at night, and once in a while, the prostitutes hang out in the corner waiting for the cop cars to go by.
I think there was some sort of like massage parlor above.
Yeah.
All right. So after your internship, after graduation, you find yourself in Boston, and
through Terry.
Yeah. So Terry had worked at the Globe before you came to New York.
Yeah.
But talk about the Globe. This is really your first paying job after college, right?
First job. I was interviewed by Ron Campisi, who has his own cone of silence. You couldn't get two words out of this guy sometimes. The interview essentially went, he's over there, I'm over here. The worst thing happens, he takes me out to lunch. We say probably two words the whole time. And I'm thinking, I don't have this job. I don't have this job because this guy's not even talking to me. And he just looks at me and he goes, I'm not kidding. He goes, you want a job? Yeah. And he goes, okay. And he says, It's about $18,000 or $19,000. I thought that was the most money in the world, man.
What year are we talking about?
What, 84 maybe? Like, I thought, are you kidding me? I had like part-time jobs at Gibbons Department Store. I remember taking, because I was so paranoid, whatever money I had, my receipts, I'd keep them and take them to the H&R Block. And I remember the guy was just like, you make less than $3,000. There's no reason for you to come down here. So I was making nothing. And I thought, this is the most money. And it was that I've ever made, but it was also the money that I could send back home. My dad lives in Jamaica, and my grandparents, and I could send them money, and I could give my mom some money or whatever.
And you could still afford to have your own apartment?
I rented a room, a great little room. There's a wonderful little brownstone, and it's a wonderful little place. It's $400 a month, and it's one room, which was fine because when I moved in there, I literally, and I kid you not, I moved in there, I had one plate, one knife, one fork, one cup, a chair, and a mattress on the floor. The woman who was there, she's, I'll bring a bed for you. You could use. So it was just like bare minimum. But the Globe for me was like, it was such a great school. It was a great school in a sense of your first job, you think, oh my God, what is this going to be like?
And you're doing daily stuff, right?
Mostly I started out just shadowing people. And this great group of people like Lucy Bartholomew was, and Holly Nixon. And I didn't even know that people designed newspapers. That was the thing. I was taking the job because I needed the money. And the thing is, honestly, it was out of New York. And I really wanted to get out of New York for a little bit.
Mm-hmm. When we interviewed Gail Anderson, she told us that in addition to great opportunities, obviously, the Globe presented some difficulties for both of you.
This was at a time where affirmative action started. And I remember it was a weird time. And I knew why we were hired to a certain extent. At the same time, I think we both hoped we had enough chops as young kids. We weren't without any kind of talent. And I think that was how Ron wanted to look at it. If I'm going to make this hire under these circumstances, I'm going to hire some really good people. But aside from the guys who worked in a print shop, who would call us colored, and this is not very long ago, that he referred to us as the colored kids. But there was one designer who basically, she was very clear about it. She said, you only got hired because you guys are black. And yet you know the truth, but you also know, yeah, but I can do the work. And so you had to deal with that. Neither one of us, Gail or myself, it wasn't about getting mad or whatever. It's just doing the work. But what it did offer me was a pleasant place to go to school. The designers I worked with, the ones that I had to deal with and I liked, they brought me through, learned how to sign an illustration. And this is a time where you had to talk to the person, they fax you a sketch, the next day it comes in a FedEx. And so you learn how to do it quickly. You learn how to make decisions. And I enjoyed it. And I enjoyed it to a certain extent, listening and sitting at the feet of somebody like Lynn Staley, or as I said, Lucy Bartholomew. They were like really talented people. Plus, at the time, they were doing such interesting work on the broadsheet and winning awards. And these are the people I came to admire.
Yeah, and actually at the time, the Globe was really considered nationally like a cutting edge publication, like all the work that was coming out of there.
And the thing is, like what they were doing, they were just doing the work. They were doing the work and being creative about it. And I have to say, I had to give Ron some props because he was being very fearless at a time where it's almost like saying, yeah, we do newspapers, but it doesn't have to do it this way. You can do it that way too. I feel like I was just lucky to have dropped in at that moment.
I have to assume, knowing what editors were like in those days, they must have been pretty progressive, or Ron must have been incredibly forceful, or a combination of both.
It was a combination of both. And in a way, you might even say, to a certain extent, it's not like I was fearless and brave or whatever, but I was clueless. And even in my life of living there, I remember somebody invited me to some dinner at the time in Southie. And I remember taking the bus there and end up walking someplace and getting to her house. And she said, what are you doing here? And I said, what do you mean? It's like me and a bunch of people. She said, I said I'd come pick you up. This is a really bad area for you to be walking through.
Yeah, that's the old Irish section of Boston.
Yeah. And there were people that I think about now who really helped me through. There was a designer named Jim Pavlovich, who I've always remembered, who died tragically one night, fell, hit his head, and basically froze in the snow. And I had to work with him. I had to shadow him for a while. And he made a place that I thought would be scary. And he was a grumpy gusset, no doubt, but he made it really fun and pleasant.
All right. So you did your time at the Globe, your standard couple, 2 or 3 years.
No, actually, exactly 16 months.
Okay. Short stint for you, but probably because of the next opportunity that came up. You got a call from the Washington Post, right? Is that true? Yeah. Because I know Sunday magazines from doing them myself. It was another really big deal what was going on at the Post. They were reinventing their Sunday magazine. They were sizing it down to a newsstand magazine with great paper and new trim size and all kinds of possibilities. But talk about that opportunity, getting you to Washington. What did they promise you?
The thing is, I had met Michael O'Keefe. He was the creative director for the newspaper. And I had met him at a conference, and we had talked, and we had gotten along. And I said, eventually, I want to try something else. And it was one of those things where you don't hear from the person. It was just a conversation. And then he called, and he said, you want to come by and talk about some stuff? And I remember getting on the plane. While I was on the plane, and I was going there for the newspaper, while I was on the plane, the magazine was sitting on the seat with the bar that went like this, the Washington Post. And I was just like, oh, this is really cool. And it felt fat, like a thick magazine. And so we talked a little bit, and he said, we don't have anything right now, but I really want to keep you in mind for something. And I said, okay. I'm like, not for nothing, but I saw you in the magazine. I would mind working on your magazine. And he said, I think you're actually looking for somebody. And so he brought me down to Michael Walsh. And Michael Walsh introduced me to Brian Noyes and to Jay Lovinger, who was the editor at the time. And he's a great guy. And I met with those guys. And I think like a month or so later, they gave me a call and said, do you want to come work for us? And I was conflicted because I was actually having a good time in Boston. The only thing that I hated about Boston was the cold. So I went to Washington. And by the time I left Washington, the only thing I hated about Washington was the heat. Yeah, because it's built on a friggin' swamp. But the Globe, I wasn't sure if I'd learned enough yet of the Globe, but I couldn't give up the opportunity.
And so when you got there, you fell in love with the newspaper vibe at the Post, the romance, Ben Bradley, Woodward and Bernstein, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, yeah. You walk into that place and it's these guys like you've heard about, it's like Ben Bradley. He didn't look like Jason Robard from the movie. When he'd walk down the hall to the magazine, he'd use his fist to like bang the cabinets and they all talk like this. Hey, get that son of a bitch up here.
What was your position at that point?
I was designer at the time, the number 3 guy from a number 3 team. And the guys were like really given. Michael Walsh was the one I sort of connected with mostly. And he was this designer with kind of the art mind. It just didn't come from a pure design place. There's always this little part of art that had to exist in there for him.
What do you remember most about working there?
It made me appreciate the story. It wasn't just the design. So design didn't exist without the story, what you could do with it and what the possibilities are. And that even stays with me now, that what I've always liked is the possibility. And what I loved about newspapers is the people, smart, driven, just real smart people, drive you crazy, full of themselves at times, but just smart. It was almost like going to school somehow, like an education that you missed. And then you came back around and you had got how important this thing was.
There was a standard to uphold.
Yeah, you had to get it right. Also, what was good about working on the magazine is I remember we were doing a story about Japanese internment camps, right? And I was laying it out. And I had this idea of using within the layout this piece of barbed wire, because the piece talked about the barbed wire around the internment camps. And I liked how it looked. And I remember Walsh saying to me, yeah, but you know what? It's not what the barbed wire looked like. That's barbed wire from 1990 something. Yeah. And that's the thing that I loved about it. You can't muck around. There's no fake in the thing. Also, what I liked about working at the Post, I absolutely loved the stories, the people, the characters. My first week, they took me to a place called the Post Pub. And you could get a burger. And a lot of the writers would go there. You see them like working on stories or whatever. And they're having their lunch. And I remember the first day I got there and they're ordering stuff. And the waitress comes around to me and she's got like old school waitress uniform and she says, what do you want? And I said, can I get a medium burger? And she goes, you get a burger or you get that the way we make it. I was just like, I love this place.
Okay. So after the Post, you head back to New York for yet another incredible opportunity to go work with Gary Kepke, who sadly just passed a couple months ago.
Yeah.
At Vibe magazine, but also with the man who would become your hero, right? George Pitts, who was the photographer.
George Pitts. Yeah.
Let's talk about Vibe briefly and talk about what getting to work with George meant to you.
I can't even remember how I went to see them, but I remember that I was going to take a pay cut to do this magazine. I was pretty clear about that. It wasn't about the money. I wanted to do this magazine. I want to be a part of this. And Gary was there. And in fact, he did ask, are you sure about that? I'm like, yeah, I'm going to take a pay cut. It's okay. I've lived on less and I can figure it out. And I remember the first time I saw George, I thought he was like Al Green or something like that.
Yeah, just for our listeners, tell people who George Pitts was.
Oh, George. George was a little older. George was the smartest black man that I know. Erudite. Somebody said, and I kid you not, somebody said that George walks in the light. And what they meant was, if you're with George and something good's going to happen, it's going to happen there. He was open. He was incredibly gifted photographer, self-taught, incredibly gifted painter. Much later in his life, much later that I found out, because he didn't talk about it, that he had written and published a poem in the Paris Review. Just incredible, this person. And I loved working with him. And when I went to Vibe, and Vibe is probably the only publication I had conflict with. For a long time, I felt like there was unfinished business there. But if I know anything about photography, it's all through George. There were things I couldn't see. And when he talked, and he'd always have a toothpick, and you'd go, Richard, that's really novel. And then not say anything after. And in fact, at one point, I said to George, this is going to be embarrassing, but I said to George, I want you to be my rabbi. If I have a problem, I want to come to you. If I need advice, I'm going to come to you.
What Bill Shapiro call you?
Was it Bill or Mark Danzig?
Oh, Mark Danzig, maybe.
Yeah, the Jamaican Woody Allen.
Yes.
But George, he left a mark on me. And I enjoyed working with him just immensely. And even after Vibe, we remained friends. And then when Bill decided to hire George for life, I'm like, sure, this is the guy, because photography was photography with George. He wasn't like, this was for this or this is for that. And he was a humanist. Vibe magazine, especially in the first 5-6 years, owed so much to him. One of the first things that we did, I don't know if you know the work of Dana Luxemburg. She is a Dutch photographer, and she came to the office at Vibe with this incredible pack of work, photographs of people that she'd been working with for years in Watts. Here's this white blonde woman hanging out in Watts. And the work was just amazing. And she brought it, and we saw it, and I looked at George and I said, we're going to print these. We're going to print these, right? And George was like, of course we're going to print these. And she looks at George and she says, I have to take them to Van de Fair because they want to see them. And George was like, Van de Fair is never going to print any of these. Forget it. But you should take it to Van de Fair. Because one of George's things, George would always say, Richard, always take a meeting. And so he says to her, go take a meeting, and then when you're finished, come back to us and we'll print it.
We'll be right back.
Print is Dead is made possible by the support of the Society of Publication Designers. The SPD powers the future of visual storytelling, setting the standard for editorial excellence and shaping the future of visual culture. For more information, visit spd.org. Let's jump ahead to Us Magazine, where it looked like you really hit your stride as a magazine designer.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure what your title was at that point. Is that the first time that you led an art department?
That was after Vibe, which didn't end well. But it made a great transition because after Vibe, I went to work for Janet Froelich at the New York Times. And I've always said, if there were 5 art directors, my favorite art directors, she's either 1 or 2. And it's not just in the design. I watched her work, and the thing was like, God, I wish I could work like this person. How just smart. And I remember one day sitting in a meeting with her with a bunch of these, New York Times old boy guys, and she just navigated that. And I was just like, woman should be president. Should go work at the UN or something. Yeah. But it helped me at a time where I just kind of was a little bit down in the dumps to watch somebody do something really well.
She could do a master class on running an art department.
Oh, absolutely. She's one of my favorites.
She's a great partner, and she's
Yeah.
willing to let people go.
Yeah.
Let them do their thing.
I learned that from her, because somebody gives you like a desk and a computer and a couple people around you, and you think you know how to do it until you see somebody do it. And then you go, oh, shit.
One of the things that I always thought was very impressive about her was how she dealt with these very intelligent newsroom men.
Yeah.
And was able to collaborate and persuade and able to create great work even under those circumstances, which is not easy.
That was the thing that was so impressive to me, because it's not about that she was smart and that's her, that's natural. It's how she could navigate all that, because there's smart people who can't do that. And it was so seamless. Graceful and herself full of grace and effortless. And so when I'd gotten to us, and this was with the help of Gail and Fred. Fred didn't sign on. Debbie knows Fred is not going to sign on somebody he doesn't know. He's got to be convinced that the person can do it. Not even for Gail, he's going to do that.
Us magazine was owned by Wenner Media, which owned Rolling Stone and Men's Journal at the time. Yeah. So Fred was the de facto design chief for the whole company.
Yeah. And it's funny because it's one of the things I felt like that was another school. And I think that if I had gone there first before I'd gone to Vibe, I think I would have survived Vibe longer. I learned a lot at that place. And it's funny. It's one of those places where people go, who was one of your favorite editors working with? And I would say, Debbie's going to be like, what are you, out of your goddamn mind? I would say Jan. And people go, what, you got Stockholm Syndrome? What's the matter with you?
Jan had incredible taste.
Look, he owned the store, so he could do whatever the hell he wanted. Yeah. But at the same time, what I did admire at times where there's a gut feeling. It wasn't right all the time. And he had his issues that we all know. But I also thought that he was smart about realizing the partner that he had in Fred. He's not a business guy, but I would be in an office where, we're sitting around a table and business guys and blah, blah, blah. And Jan would look around and go, so Fred, what do you think? And Fred's not like gregarious. He'll just say his thing. And Jan was just say, yeah, that makes sense. Move on. So he's recognized that.
So were you replacing Robert Priest at Us?
No, I think Pam Barry left. She moved to Italy. When I got there, her team was still there. I inherited these two wonderful photo editors, Rachel Knepfer and Jennifer Crandall. And with Jennifer, I felt like I was in the 50s or something. Darling, no, please, darling, no. I'll tell you, that series of work that I did with the big type, that would not have happened. And I really mean this, would not have happened if Jan didn't listen to Fred. I had this idea, and the idea was, why write the headlines the same way all the time? You're going to write the same stupid headlines. It's hanging with blah, 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 or the life of yada, yada, yada. Why not just use their names big, and in the deck, you do your whatever, blah, blah, blah. And I could say that, but I couldn't sell it. There's no way I could. Fred's the one that sold it.
Sell it because we used to do that at Rolling Stone.
Yeah.
So Richard, it's funny having now gone through your whole path to getting to Us magazine. It's funny how you can see all of that come back out when you were at Us. I see Paula Scher. I see Terry Coppell and the way he used to have fun with type and his personality. I see Gary being cutting edge and your understanding of photography, learning from George Pitts and working at weeklies. Us was a weekly at the time.
It became a weekly after I left.
Okay. And all of these steps of your career, they manifested themselves in your design at Us, which proceeded to go on and win a ton of awards. It was in all the design annuals. Several issues of yours every year would win tons of awards. I don't think Us ever looked as good since it began its downfall long after you were gone to become basically a supermarket tabloid. But just talk about, from an outsider looking in, I see it as you finding yourself and expressing it through your work.
It's a little bit of both. Obviously, if you look at Us, its inspiration came out of Miles Reed's jazz records.
We're talking Blue Note, basically.
Yeah, all that Blue Note, Miles Reed, all that stuff. He was still, I think, an unsung designer. And I have those records. I've always loved them because my dad kept them. And I enjoyed doing it and playing with it and then riffing on it. The idea that you can riff on it and make it your own. But at the same time, it's like people like the work you do. And I appreciate it, but it feels like, what have I done lately? That makes sense. And even when I left there and went to Premiere. I mostly went to Premiere so I just could get away from us because it was becoming a weekly. And to be honest, yes, it didn't look as good, but it made more money. And ultimately, it's not what a magazine is for. It's a commercial venture. And so my feeling was when I saw that come in, it's either you stay or you get out of the way. Not my magazine. It's Jan's magazine. And as much as I enjoyed it, what I did enjoy about that place is the people I worked with. I really did. Such characters and the stuff that happened. But I could see this change happening where it wasn't going to be as much fun.
Yeah, I mean, things were changing. I left to have a child, but I think things were steadily changing after that.
Because I'd seen you guys working and you guys were doing this fantastic. I still remember there's this wonderful thing you did with an arrow, and I think it might have been a big O or whatever. It was just beautiful.
The C shaped like an arrow.
Yeah, yes. And
Evan Costner. Yeah.
And I felt so privileged to be in this place where down the hall were these group of incredible designers. It's like, how come you not be inspired? And up the street was David Amario, and before him, Mark Dance. And I have to admit, we were all feeding off what was going on down at Rolling Stone.
Absolutely.
But what I think was good was that the guy who owned the magazine allowed it. For whatever reason, he allowed that to happen.
It's true.
For all that fantastic work to come.
And it was such a golden age.
It was.
And all of Wenner Media. It was Straight Arrow Publishing, yeah.
To a certain extent, I have a difficult time talking about this stuff because it was such a great time. And I look at the work that I see, and it's like being a jazz musician. After a while, the trumpet becomes harder to blow. You can't make that tune again. You can't hit that note after a while.
Okay, so once you finished at Us, you went on to Premiere, and then you went on to Saveur. But Saveur must have been quite a change because this was food and shelter.
Yeah. And at the same time, I felt it was food, it was shelter. I still believe designers, that's what we're there, we solve problems. Better still, if you have taste, you can solve it better. My grandmother always said, good manners and taste will get you anywhere. Yeah. So.
Did you have to get into the nitty gritty of food photography, which is an incredibly super specialty?
I had a wonderful photo editor there, and she helped immensely. Michelle Hyman, and she helped me get to that place. But I enjoy the difference. And to be honest, there was a period of time I wanted nothing to do with any more celebrities. I don't want to see him. I don't want to hear him. I don't want to hear their whining. At that point, I started looking for something different.
Let's just talk about where we are now. We've lost a lot of magazines.
Yeah.
And you've certainly seen your share of magazine deaths, as have I. Yet we're still surviving, still making a living on staff with real magazines. Mm-hmm. Let's just talk about the changes that you feel have happened during this time. There have been a lot.
I'll tell you one thing. As you said, I've seen a lot of magazine death. When Scott was hiring me for Ink, I said, I'm going to be very open with you, right? Just about every magazine where I've been has died. So essentially, I should be looking at you with a shroud and a sickle.
You were the Grim Reaper.
Yes, I am the Grim Reaper of magazines. So be careful. This is before you even said yes.
Yes, but we're all grim. You made the list. Do you find it harder these days, as I do, to be courageous, to be the same design director that you've always been?
It's in that place where it's like everything means something to editors. Don't do this because Florence in New Jersey might not like that. Don't do this because Ezekiel in West Virginia is just going to hate that. And some of it could be legitimate. I remember at Life, we had put Catherine Zeta-Jones on the cover, and we got a letter from somebody that said, how can you put that crackhead whore on a cover? And that was the thing where I thought the Jan thing, it's like gravity left the building, a kind of sense of, can you take a chance here? And the thing that people take chances on are not chance. I mean, not really. Not after they have basically put it through the machine and tested 10 million times. That's not taking a risk.
But in a way, it seems like with the focus on digital and social and mobile and all that, that would I be wrong in assuming that there's less pressure on the print, that there would be maybe more opportunities to experiment?
from where I sit on our magazine. I think there might be less. Our business model is a little different because we have several issues a year, and it's a legitimate magazine, but all at the same time, it's not like pure print magazine anymore. It's used as another vehicle within the company, part of the ecosystem. But I'm very hopeful about it because I don't think the technology is caught up yet with the possibilities of what can be done. But at the same time, I think when you're hemmed in by parameters, you get creative. The issue is, as I see it right now, is it's hard to break and get those possibilities going because a lot of magazines want you to do that with as very little as possible, with very little resources, very little help.
And very little risk.
Yeah, and very little risk. And the thing I don't think they understand is because it's digital, it doesn't mean that you need less time. It's this weird fallacy that happens that because it's digital, it shouldn't take you that long, which is a bullshit thing. You're still thinking. You're still a thinking person. You still have to create it. It's only a tool. That's what it is. It's a tool. And you're faced with that. And it's a frustration. It's a frustration because I am convinced that you can be as creative as you are in print, but you need the support. You need for people to take a chance on it, take that risk. But everybody's freaked out.
All right, Richard, I want to wrap by asking if you would be so kind as to share the story of an event that changed everything for you. I think it's very uplifting, the lesson you learned in this process of what's important and what's not important. It's an inspiring and terrifying story.
So in 2008, Terry and I had just sort of formed an informal partnership. I was working at his house in Brooklyn. That was his office. And one night I left. And I have to say, there are parts not even I remember. And all I remember is leaving, getting on the train. And this was January 15th, maybe. It's whenever the miracle in the Hudson happened. I can't remember. And then waking up like a week later in the hospital. I had what they call a sudden death attack. And what it means is your heart stopped beating, and sometimes you get out, and sometimes you don't. And the scary thing I thought was not me, but the fact that my daughter at the time, I think was probably 2 years old, that they showed up at my door. Police showed up at my door, and they said, "We have this wallet, and we have this address. We need you to come up with us." And the funniest thing was, Anka said, and Luna really liked the sirens on the car. She liked it. And in any case, I was born with a defective valve. And every doctor I went to said, "Oh, you have a murmur. You have a murmur." And then at one point, a couple of months before, I went to a doctor on the Upper East Side, and he said, "Kind of sounds funny. We should take a look at it later in the year." And somewhere between that and that, that's where I ended up. And the good thing was, it's weird. This is how it was told to me by several people. I passed out on the train. I'm lying down. The cops come around. As somebody put it, they thought I was drunk or something, or on drugs or whatever. And an EMT worker who was coming from the Miracle on the Hudson, she sees me there. She sees the commotion. She goes over and says, "What's going on?" She sees the cops. And she looks down and she says to the cop, "I think he's turning blue. He's having some sort of attack. Go get a defibrillator." And she sends him out. And because of her efforts, they got me in an ambulance really quickly. I get there. They call my wife and a child. I get to the hospital. Poor Anka is not even sure what to do. And there were two doctors, an older doctor and a younger doctor. The younger doctor said, "Look, there's this thing now where when this happens, a person in a cold bath into a bed of ice to slow things down." The old doctor said, "Listen, you might just get out of it." Anka doesn't know what to do. She calls her brother, who is a neurosurgeon, and he says, "Stick him in the ice." And I'm assuming that may have helped me. So they stuck me in the ice. And I was there for a couple of days. And I eventually woke up. And according to Anka, she said, one day I just got up and looked around and I looked at her and she was on the computer. And she said, I looked at the computer and said, "What a wonderful machine. What is that thing?" And she thought, "Oh my God, his brain is gone." She's just like bawling. Yeah.
Oh, what a story.
Yeah. And then after that, I don't know, things change in how I dealt with people and how I worked with people. And somehow the design didn't seem as, it's still important to me, but important in a different way. But what became important to me is how I worked with people And I see it in myself. I have a group of people I work with, and it's all diversity. And I've always been doing that anyway, and they're all diverse. But what's important to me is like to become better people or something. That's what's important to me.
The process?
It's the process, and it's working with them. And because they're much younger, it's almost like they're not my kids, but it's whatever I can do to help somebody get on their way from here to there. Because in the beginning, after that attack, I had thought that it was over for me. I didn't know what I was going to do. I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. The thing with Terry and myself collapsed, and not in a good way, because I really didn't know what I wanted to do.
At what stage was that? Was that while you're working at Saveur? Or?
This was before Saveur. And it's funny because I took Saveur because I needed to feed my family, but I don't know if my heart was in it. And after Saveur, I decided, let me see if I can do something that makes sense, that offers some kind of contribution outside the foreign affairs. It was political. There was no celebrities. It was about exposing people to what was going on in the world. And yet that didn't pan out as much either. I didn't, so I guess I'm still looking.
It's interesting. When you first told us that story, I was thinking about how, and I'm sure all three of us are guilty, I think it's a generational thing. It's also a sort of creative obsession thing.
Yeah.
The way we have all always sweated what normal people would think is pointless. It's just, really? You're going to sweat designing a caption to go next to a photo? And when something like that happens, you were dead briefly. But
that's the thing. Yeah, that's the thing.
But the industry we're in recycles that mentality of everything's so important and it's so urgent and it's going to cost me my job if I don't get it.
Yeah.
And other people will see my mistake. And I'm curious, so that was 2008, 2009. You come back to work, really a changed man and really a changed industry at that point.
Oh, yeah.
And you're now, I'm sure, working with a bunch of, I don't know, millennials, Gen Zs, or whatever, who have a completely different relationship with work.
Completely.
And it's completely different, but I would say it's veering towards healthy.
Yeah, yeah.
But so I just wonder, because we're all sort of the same age, I wonder what it's like, because I have not been working in a company in quite some time. And I wonder if the combination of your sort of looking at life differently and they're looking at life differently. What's the day-to-day like in a magazine environment anymore?
First of all, it's not even a magazine environment. It's just work. Because it's all one thing now. There's no separation between digital platforms
and between advertising and everything.
Yeah, they feed each other. But I still like the idea of trying to be creative. It's trying to bend the spoon, as in the Matrix. How can you make this thing happen and still make it be lovely? And the thing I learned is, I think mentorship is important. And I say that because sometimes mentorship doesn't mean like somebody you have to sit next to or whatever. Sometimes it's a matter of learning something from somebody. And sometimes that mentor is younger than who you are. And some of those people that I work with who are younger, I'm learning from them as much as they're learning from me. There's a saying from Gil Scott-Heron who says mentorship is important because sometimes the dream you're in is not your own. And I love that. It's like whatever you do can come from somewhere else. And it keeps me hopeful.
For more on this and all of our episodes, visit our website where, in addition to complete transcripts of all our interviews, along with portfolios, archival photos, links, and other great information on our guests, you'll find our blog, Entry Points, about all things magazine, and our ever-expanding swag shop with all kinds of great custom merch. You can also support the podcast by clicking the adorable yellow button at the top of the page, all available at magazium.co.
Print is Dead, Long Live Print is a member of the Hub and Spoke Audio Collective, a nonprofit association of audio storytellers dedicated to promoting and sustaining high-quality, independent podcasting. Learn more at hubspokeaudio.org.
Magazium is made possible by the generous support of listeners like you. If you love our shows and can't wait for new episodes, or even if you just listen from time to time and love knowing we're here, please consider making a donation to help keep us going. Visit magazium.co/support.
Print is Dead, Long Live Print is a production of Magazium, LLC. For more information, visit our website, magazium.co, or follow us on social media at magazium.co. Please give us a like and a review on your favorite podcast app. It really helps. Thanks very much for listening.